In today's video, I'm going to be breaking down why I, as a 21-year-old, will never eat a vegetable again. In the first part of this video, I'm going to be breaking down how plants are essentially trying to kill you and how they do this through something known as biowarfare in the form of defense chemicals. Then we'll look at how some of these defense chemicals impact us and how modern vegetables have been tampered with to the point that they're basically unrecognizable. And then finally, I'll break down exactly what I eat instead to ensure that I get all my nutrients. The sole goal of every living organism is to survive and reproduce. Now, animals do this through methods like biting, kicking, running, those sorts of things. However, plants are obviously stationary. They can't do any of these things. So they develop something known as defense chemicals. In fact, in every single vegetable that we commonly consume, there are over 60 different identified carcinogens in them. This is why vegetables have such a bitter taste. Our taste buds identify these defense chemicals, and as a result, we get this unpleasant taste. This is not dissimilar to how our nose can smell when something's off, and therefore we get an unpleasant smell from something. Now let's take a brief look at some of the most well-known defense chemicals. First up, lectins. Lectins are a protein that binds to carbohydrates. Now the problem with lectins is not only do they bind to nutrients preventing their absorption, but they also bind to our gut, which causes inflammation. Lectins are present in many foods, including wheat, oats, potatoes, beans, lentils. They're in so many plants and they cause great harm to humans. Then we have phytoestrogens, which is a type of defense chemical that mimics estrogen in our body and messes with all our hormones. This right here, in my opinion, is one of the key reasons why so many people are depressed and anxious nowadays. Everyone's hormones are just so out of whack. Now these are present in many of our foods, but the worst by far being soy. In soy, there's just an absurd amount. These are also present in many other plants, including cabbage, spinach, garlic, onion, and many other fruits and vegetables. Another defense chemical is cyanide, which isn't typically in vegetables. However, it's a very fascinating example of how these defense chemicals work. How cyanide works is it stops cells from being able to access oxygen, and essentially this can cause people to die. Cyanide has quite literally been used by assassins throughout history, as well as people that want to put it in a way that YouTube will allow, people that no longer want to live. There is a very famous example of a mass cyanide death in the Jonestown massacre, in which a cult of 900 people died, mainly through mass suicide, and one of the main methods that they used was drinking cyanide. Now this alone is concerning. Every vegetable's sole goal is to harm us. However, this is just the tip of the iceberg. The next problem we're going to talk about is how vegetables have been crossbred for about 12,000 years. Ever since we came out of the Ice Age and started farming, humans have been crossbreeding plants. Now what this essentially means is they get two plants, grow them close to each other, and mix the pollens up from each plant, which basically develops this like hybrid style of plant. Now the goal of this is to mix favorable traits from each plant in order to build the ultimate plant, I guess you could call it. Now ideally in this ultimate plant, what you'd want is a pest-resistant plant, a very large plant that provides lots of energy, and ideally, if possible, that it tastes good also. Now when you do this for an extended period, like we humans have done, it leads to plants looking unrecognizable. On screen right now, you can see exactly how different corn looks from when we first discovered it. And I mean broccoli, it's not even a real plant. We've just crossbred it from wild cabbage. As I mentioned earlier, one of the key traits farmers would look for in plants that they wanted to crossbreed was how pest resistant it was. Now for something to be more pest resistant, it means that it's going to be more defended. So it's going to have even more of these defense chemicals that we talked about earlier. And then if this wasn't bad enough, in more recent years, we've even taken this a step further with something known as GMO. Now what GMO is scientists will get a plant, take it into a lab, and essentially copy one gene and paste it into another plant. And often this gene is a pest-resistant gene, so these plants are just becoming more and more defended. Now this has been much to the dismay of many people, and on the slide right now you'll see an image of people in the Philippines storming a field where one of these genetically modified plants was being grown. Now to make matters worse, vegetables bought from a store are going to be just doused in pesticides. On screen right now I have all the ingredients that you're consuming every single time you take a bite from a store-bought vegetable. Do you notice how one of the ingredients' sole goal is to leach into the vegetable as far as it can to prevent it from being washed off? These pesticides are designed to withstand against torrential rainfall, so do you really think that by the little rinse you give it before you cook it, it's going to do very much? And before you think you've outsmarted the system and you go for organic vegetables, all organic means is natural pesticides. Now, what does that even mean? When you think about it, at some point or another, everything comes from a natural source, so organic isn't what you think it is. These pesticides are designed to kill animals. Now maybe they're not going to kill us, but I can guarantee they're not having very nice effects on us. Okay, so I've come to the conclusion that plants have a number of bad things about them. However, what about all the good? Plants have a lot of nutrients in them, right? But what has happened with the mass production of these plants for the consumer marketplace is that they've been grown in the same soils over and over again, and there hasn't been a chance for animals like cows to refertilize the soil like there would in a natural ecosystem. So what's happened is that all these soils have just been completely stripped of their nutrients. And then we have pesticides that have done even more damage to the soil. Now let's say you find some soil that still has some nutrients left in it. Plants still have a very poor bioavailability of the nutrients that they contain, which essentially means that we are not able to break down the nutrients in these plants. The defense chemicals in plants basically act as anti-nutrient substance, and it blocks our ability to break these things down. Fiber is one of these. Nutrients bind to fiber and they just pass straight through us. Lectins, like I talked about earlier, nutrients bind to lectins and we can't break them down. There are so many compounds in plants that do this. In fact, let's have a look at some studies that break this down. In this study titled Iron Deficiency, they found that humans could only absorb 1.4 to 7% of the iron in spinach, whereas in meat it was above 20%. Let's not forget that the iron in red meat is also higher to begin with than it is in spinach. And then we have another study, which again looked at the bioavailability of nutrients in plants versus animal products. And in this study, they concluded that the overview of studies showed that in general, vitamins in foods originating from animals are more bioavailable than vitamins in foods sourced from plants. Not to mention that there are many nutrients we can't even get from plants that we can only get in meat, such as vitamin B12, creatine, carnosine, the list goes on. Every single nutrient humans need to thrive can be found in meat. However, we cannot say the same thing for plants. When I eat something, there are three things I consider. How much good stuff does something contain? How much bad stuff does something contain? As well as ideally, to be completely honest, I would like something that tastes nice. Ideally, we want as much of the good stuff as possible. And what do vegetables have? I guess a small amount of nutrients, but as we talked about, it's hard for us to absorb, and nowadays it's much less than it used to be anyway. And then obviously is a little of the bad stuff as well. And as we've seen in this video, plants are highly defended, and they're even more defended now than they used to be because of all the selective crossbreeding. And then on top of that, most of them are covered in these synthetic pesticides nowadays anyways. I also do like my food to taste good, partially because I'm a human and, well, who doesn't want their food to taste good? But also in the sense that if something doesn't taste good, it's your body's way of warning you, hey, there's stuff in here that we don't want. So vegetables, they have very little good, a lot of bad, and then they taste pretty meh. So what do I eat instead? It's very simple. I follow a carnivore diet, the diet that humans have eaten for the majority of our existence. In meat, you can get every single nutrient you need, and have a guess at how many compounds we've identified in meat that are bad for us. That's right, absolutely zero. There has never been a study that's conclusively shown that meat is bad for us, and populations like the Inuit from hundreds of years ago, before they modernized and started eating the same garbage as us, had unbelievably good health. As well as the fact that when we look at fossil records from humans 12,000 years ago and beforehand, they were in remarkable shape. They had no lesions or markings on their bones, which indicated they had very little disease. However, all the fossils we find after this time period, in more recent years, in between 12,000 years ago and now, these fossils, they now have lesions and markings, which shows as soon as we start eating plants, our health started declining. Now I know a lot of people watching this video will have a lot of concerns about red meat. Well, what about things like fiber? Don't we need vitamin C? Isn't high cholesterol bad? In tomorrow's video, I'm going to be breaking down all of these things. So if you're watching this video within the first 24 hours, keep an eye out for that video tomorrow. And if you're watching this video and it's more than a day old, I'll link to it at the end. Anyways, that concludes this presentation on why I will never eat a vegetable again. If you enjoyed this video and you want to see more of my content, consider subscribing down below. It's completely free, and it means you'll see more videos like this. On screen now are some other popular videos I made, so if those interest you, feel free to check them out. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.